video. So this is going to be drywall, and if you want to actually learn how to do drywall from an expert, I highly recommend Myron Ferguson's book and DVD. Also, he may have some YouTube videos online under Find Home Building Drywall. This is the guy that actually knows what he's doing. So if you want how I do drywall in yoga pants and not as an uber professional but still a lot of drywall, this should show you. So essential tools you're going to need. 1, coffee. I guarantee you, you're going to need lots of coffee. You're going to need some sort of razor knife to cut your drywall with. You're going to need your basic, some sort of drill, tape measure, always a tape measure, Fat Max best. You're going to need drywall. If you're replacing drywall, so I'm going to do replacing drywall and taping drywall. So if you're replacing drywall, I work most commonly in 1/2 inch and 5/8. 5/8 for the ceiling, that's fire code. 1/2 inch for walls, because who wants to lift heavier drywall than they have to, and this is permitted. You're going to need drywall screws. For the ceiling in Nevada, it's required that you put in 2 inch. For the walls, it's 1 and 5/8, slightly shorter, and if you can, go shorter because it makes you safer around your electrical. And they're sold as drywall screws. For finishing, I'm going to show you how to use paper tape. You can also use mesh tape, but I prefer paper, and also some easy corner stuff that just makes your life so much simpler. You are going to need mud. I prefer taping and topping joint compound. It's the easiest one for me to work with. It's the simplest. This is just the brand that happens to be locally, whatever works for you. You're going to need at least one of these knives to embed your tape. And this looks like it's a 6-inch embedding knife. It's very stiff, very rigid. There are other knives that are easy. And then for finishing your drywall, you can go as simple as a sponge and some water, or you can do sanding and your safety equipment, your dust mask. The amazing thing about drywall is it is non-structural. So guess what? You can mess up lots and your building will not fall down. What drywall is for aesthetics and to prevent fire. To really slow down the movement. If you had an electrical fire, if you had an inside fire, this protects your building and it looks pretty. So for actually working with drywall, so this right here, you can see we have 2 different colors. I have green board, which is moisture resistant, was used in bathrooms, anywhere that you're not going to be contacting water, and I'm not going into bathrooms, but if you're drywalling bathrooms, that's a whole different thing. We're just talking about drywalling, say, for your example, a closet. Or in this case, a garage. So this is just basic drywall. It comes in 8-foot sheets, 10-foot sheets, 12-foot sheets, 16-foot sheets. So you'll need a truck to move it, or you'll need to cut it at the store and then put it in your car. So for basic drywall cutting, so I'm in my room and I found out my wall is 24 inches wide. So I need to cut my drywall sheets 24 inches. So you can either have a drywall square, which this is, which makes my life easier, or you can use a level, you can use an exceptionally straight board, you can use your ruler, whatever you want. So I'm going to mark my drywall at my 24 inches. I then take my level, if I'm using a level, I have to mark both top and, if I'm using something without this square piece, I have to mark both top and bottom. And then I'm going to do this standing, even though it's awkward so you can see it, but I always do this sitting, kneeling on it, or down, because it's much safer and is much more accurate for me. But I'm going to show it this direction. So I've got my drywall marked at the 24 inches, everything around. I carefully brace my square because I have a very sharp blade and I'm about to cut it in. Okay, so it turns out my camera only films in 5-minute increments, so drink more coffee, something always goes wrong. Back to cutting. So I'm going to recut my drywall since you didn't see the last one because my camera's right. So again, I marked my line. I'm taking my very sharp blade, I'm bracing my T-square, and I'm cutting carefully along the edge, trying to keep my blade pretty upright, which apparently I can't do in this vertical orientation. The deeper you score, the easier it's going to be to break, but you don't have to score that deep. Okay, sorry, push my blade back. So there I am scored. So to break it, I'm going to gently press, maybe less gently, press on the brake, and you can see how it broke there at the gypsum line. Now I need to cut the paper. If you just rip from here, you'll tear the paper all off, and the gypsum itself doesn't want to stay together without paper. So I put my knife back out on an 8-foot sheet. Obviously, this sometimes requires 2 people or more creative bracing. All right. And there I have my cut sheet of drywall. Relatively simple, other than the fact that I straight off my line cutting vertically where I couldn't see. If I did, this happens all the time when you do this. You either shave it with a knife, or they have these great cool drywall shavers called Sureforms. They're not very expensive. If you're doing a lot of drywall, I highly recommend it. And then there's my cut edge. Great. So we cut drywall. It's ready to install. Now we have to screw drywall. When we are screwing drywall, so first and foremost, before I put my drywall on, back up, and I always forget this, so you're probably going to forget it too, because it's going to be one of those steps you go, oh, I should have remembered that. When my wall is open, all my framing members are exposed. All my studs are here, you can see them, there's no drywall on here. When my stud is here and I can see it, I need to mark this, so I know where I'm screwing. So on the top of my wall, up near the framing member that's not going to be buried, so pretend this is the top of my wall, I'll put a little mark up there, on the little framing member up there that we can see. And then I'm going to come down here, and depending on your floor, you'll have to mark differently. So I'm either going to put on, painter's tape doesn't always stay, you might need something more permanent, painter's tape might work. I'm going to put on a little piece of painter's tape if I'm just marking on the floor. If I have anything exposed, like a piece of framing down there, I can mark down there, but I've marked both ends. And then I'm either going to draw a line between the two, which means, I have to get something long enough that it can span that distance, or, easier yet, I get a chalk line, also not very expensive. I position it at the bottom, I position it at the top, and bam! I have marked the middle of my stud. And why that is important is because when you attach your drywall, you always want your drywall to actually be screwed into a stud. Any screws that go into nothing, that go into thin air behind my wall, like that, are just going to spin. See how that's just spinning and spinning and spinning. That's attaching nothing. Not only that, you won't be able to countersink it. They're a pain to get back out. You kind of have to brace them and pull them back out. It happens all the time. No big deal. But the reason that you want to be careful is because, like in this wall, there's electrical running right here. When I'm screwing, the one thing I want to worry about, drywall is it's so cosmetic overall. But the one thing I really want to make sure I don't do is hit my electrical. So when my screw goes into the drywall and sinks, it sinks a fair way. If I miss my stud, if I'm going into my stud, I'm fine. If I miss my stud and my electrical is stapled on here, I can nick the electrical insulation and potentially expose bare wires beneath. That is potential for a fire hazard. It is so not very common, but still, that is the one thing you want to avoid, which marking your studs will really prevent, is because your screws are always going to go into the wood, and then you're going to be fine. So when I screw into drywall, so let me do this. I countersunk that in the video you didn't see because my camera died. So, I'm back. Okay, let's see if in 5 minutes I can cover screwing in drywall. Okay, rest of screwing in drywall. I really love dropping that teaspoon. So when you screw in your drywall, so here's my 1 5/8 on walls, my 2 inches on ceilings. So I want it just barely dimpled. The paper is barely broken here. I can just run my finger over. There's just a little bit of a dip. Here, my screw is completely sunk. There's not holding, the paper's broken, it's completely gone through. When I do this, and I will, I put another screw in down below. Here, if I've gone too close to the edge, generally it's supposed to be 3/8 of an inch from the edge at least, your drywall is just going to break. It's just going to come out. So when that happens, you're going to have to move to either side of the edge. If my screws are too far out, as in like that, and I run my finger over and I hit this is going to be harder to mud. This is going to be harder to make disappear. So when I find a screw like that as I'm mudding, I just think it's just a little. And now it's just barely below the surface. On my seams, I'm going generally every 8 inches, 8 to 10 inches. On my gaps between, I'm going about 12. Drywall often has these little markers, 12 to 16. So this is a 16-inch gap between these two little X's here on the drywall. And if I can line this up on the framing members on the studs, that means I know where it is. When I'm putting my drywall on a stud, if I make sure that all my seams line up halfway, as much as possible, halfway across the stud, then my drywall isn't going to flex right here. Any place the drywall flexes, when this comes to the edge and this flexes, your mud is very stiff. Now this is dry mud. That's dry mud. Your mud is very stiff. If your wall flexes, if your drywall thing flexes, this will pop, giving you those cracks you see in drywall. So you're trying to avoid that by making sure you're attached to something securely on any seam. On seams that aren't hitting, like if I'm running up this way and I have 10 feet, obviously there's not going to be a framing member here. That's okay. This is the flexing seam right here. Right now, along my framing, that's the real flexing seam. This won't have a cross member support. It'll just keep going up and you'll tape this and it'll be fine. But anywhere you can have support on your seams, if you have flowing seams, they will probably break, or you have to put something on the back of them to keep them flexing as a unit. All right, that was drywall screws. We're going to pause now, because then we're going to do mudding. Okay, mudding basics. In 5 minutes or less, we have it. All right, so I have my drywall attached, my seams are screwed, I'm ready to add my mud. You can see I started adding mud in one of these where you couldn't see it. So I'm ready to put my mud in. This is my topping compound. I got my 6-inch taping knife. I am slapping this on here about the width of my knife. I want plenty of coverage in this seam. I don't want gaps in here. My mud should come out just fine right out of the box. If it doesn't, you can add water if it's too thick. What my mud looks like right now, it doesn't droop, it's not coming off my knife, it's very stiff, it holds whatever shape it is. That's great for taping. So then we've got my paper tape, and I lost my scissors because I just took them to the other room for what else I was doing. So I'm going to measure out my seam with my paper tape, and then I'm going to add a little, especially because I'm ripping this bottom, so I'm going to want to cut it off quickly later. You can put this paper tape on dry, or you can put it on wet, like I'm doing, because I find it easier to embed. So I stick it in a bucket of clean water, and then I wring this out. Gives you some great paper cuts if you're not careful. All right, so now I want to line up my tape with the middle of my seam. You'll notice when you're staring at paper tape, you're getting here, you're going to say, she didn't tell me whether or not to put that little dimple up or down in the middle of the paper tape. That's because she actually can't figure out what the real answer is for that. So to me, it hasn't made any difference. I don't worry about it. So I just gently put this up against the wall. I haven't really pressed it into the mud, and I don't want to do that. What I need to do now is I need to actually, I don't know if you can see me here, I need to actually embed part of this so my tape won't slide. So I'm taking my knife in at like 45, and I'm running up the first, 10 to 12 inches. I'm embedding this top so my tape doesn't move. I've squeezed all that mud out from underneath, which is why there's so much mud underneath this. Then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to reverse that. See how the mud is squeezing out? I'm pulling mud out, and I'm embedding that paper into the wall. My knife is at about a 45-ish, depending on the angle of my body and how hard and awkward it is on my wrist. But it's fairly steep, and I'm pressing fairly firmly to get the paper actually, all the excess mud out from under the paper. Okay, seam taping, take 3. So when we go to tape our seams, we've got our mud. We're going to generously slather it on. This is a tapered seam. You can see there's kind of these shadows here on the side. The drywall indents slightly. These are the easiest seams to tape. So whenever you have an opportunity to make a tapered seam versus a butt seam where there is no taper, where you just rough cut the drywall, try and use these pre-manufactured taper seams because they're recessed, and it means when you add the mud and the tape, you're going to have a lot easier time finishing it. Okay, so I put a generous coating of mud all the way along this, making sure I've actually got a little gap there, so I'm going to fill that. Making sure that my uncooperative cardboard doesn't get in my way. That I have pretty even coating on, ready to embed mud. Then I'm going to stretch out my paper tape. Okay. This is where having a set of scissors handy is helpful. I gauge it about how long it is. I cut it off with extra. And then because I find this easier to do with my paper wet, you can also do this dry, but I take it in a bucket of clean water and then I just wring it out. Whoop. Get all that excess water out. Okay? And then I'm going to go to the middle of my seam, and you'll notice there's a little fold in this paper. I have yet to figure out, other than being able to fold corners, why you would do it one way or the other. The dog's going to come help me tape because it's not complete taping without a dog. I think. I'm going to cut this off below the end of my drywall. You don't want to leave paper tape below the ends of your seams anywhere because it might rip up later when the mud dries. But also be aware you usually have baseboard on things. So now I need to get my seam to stay, and I need to embed this paper into the mud. So I'm going to start with the first 8 inches. I'm going to kind of hold the paper in place, and I'm going at a 45, and I'm embedding that, and all that mud came up. See that mud? This is right out of the box. It's fairly stiff. It doesn't move, but it's still soupy enough to leave tracks. If your mud for some reason was really extra stiff, you could add water, or take it back to the hardware store and say, I need a new box of mud. This was too old. I'm coming down at a 45, pressing fairly firmly, and I'm pulling mud out, and I'm embedding that paper into the mud. Okay? Embedding that paper into the mud. Trying to catch it before it all drops off and bloopers on my floor because it's just less to clean up. And I'm going to bed this, get this cardboard out of the way, all the way down to the bottom. The last piece I might have to go pretty straight to actually get that to embed. My paper is a touch long, I'll have to cut that off in a minute. Then I'm cleaning up all the excess muds on the side. This is a much lighter scraping. I want to try not to rip or damage my paper because that's what's actually, paper's fairly strong, relatively speaking, and it's holding my seam together very nicely, embedding this mud. That's good enough to dry for a first coat. You could clean it up a little, but you're going to start tearing up your paper. And that's what coats 2 and 3 are for, is to actually make this look good. This is your structural coat. It's structural drywall. This is your structural coat. And then the other 2 are just the aesthetics of smoothing it out and making it disappear. So that's seam taping. The very basics of seam taping. This should take anywhere between a day and a couple days if you were in super wet climate, you put too much mud on, but generally a day, overnight, it should dry. Corners take a little bit longer, and once it's dry, then we're ready for coats 2 and 3. Try not to put on wet coats on wet. This will start to tear up in weird, your mud will come up in weird ways, and you'll end up fighting it all the way across. So let it fully dry to where it's hard and firm. Like this mud's fully dry and there's nothing coming off, it's hard and firm. All right, pause for that until my camera dies. Okay, really briefly, I forgot to talk about cutting out outlets. So the same thing as scoring the drywall to break it. You can do this with a knife. You're going to have to score front and back, basically all the way through. You can do this with a drywall saw. You can find it at a hardware store. It's a little short saw with a very pointy tip that you punch through. Or my favorite tool is the fine multi-tool. They're not that expensive anymore. They come with drywall blades. This is a wood blade. It'll work on drywall as well. And these things are so handy. And that's how I cut out all my outlets these days. So you mark your outlet where you need it, and then step one, you turn off your power. I don't know if you can see that. But make sure you are not working on putting up drywall and around your outlets with the power on, especially when you might be sticking, you've taken the plates off, you might be sticking your fingers in there. So just be careful about that. And then when I'm actually, when I've cut out, so I've marked the width of my box, and then I marked it up both sides, I marked the width of my box there. I leave myself a little bit of wiggle room. That's what your plates do. They cover it. And then you put it in here. If you make a mistake, don't panic. You haven't ruined your whole sheet. You can actually just treat this as a patch. You can buy cool little patch guys that stick into your drywall, and then you can attach your drywall to. Or you can put a little bit of if I accidentally, my outlet wasn't here and I cut the hole here, I can put something behind here, a little thin board, screw in on the sides, and then take this piece you cut out, put it right back in, and we'll mud tape it like a seam. It'll be like 4 mini seams. And you'll float it over and it'll be gone. So you can make your mistakes on the outlet, cut it on the wrong side of the sheet because geometry is killing you, no problem. But when you're going to work around outlets too for doing your drywall, make sure to cover them up because you just get so much mud and stuff in. Alright, pausing there. Okay, for the second coat on your seam, so your first seam has dried. It's very firm, there's no discoloration here. So the first thing I do is because I'm learning, on my first coat of mud, maybe I left big globs, and I want to take them off just to make my job easier, put on my mask. And I'm coming along here and I'm just, with this cool drywall sanding sponge from the hardware store, super cheap, or with 180 grit sandpaper. This will also work great. And I'm just getting out big blocks. Big stuff. Okay. Let the dust settle. Pretend we let the dust settle. Big stuff is gone. I am ready for coat 2 on this. So coat 2 on this, it's the same mud I used for coat 1. I'm going to add, because my mud got a little dry and because coat 2 wants to be a little thinner, I add just a little bit of water in here. That was like a teaspoon, maybe. Probably a half a teaspoon of the mud that I'm using. Just enough to loosen it up. Okay, now it's officially a teaspoon. I lied. It's a teaspoon! This is a 1.5 to 2 cups of mud. Just making it a little bit more sour cream, a little bit less pancake batter. This was, if you can do this with this knife, it's a lot harder. This is going to make my life easier. Ooh, there's a little bit of rust on it. Hence the reason my quality clothes here. So this is my 6-inch knife, so now I'm going to a slightly wider knife. This is going to feather my seams out and make them vanish. Like the first time, I'm going to put a lot on initially, just so that I don't have gaps. The full width of my trowel. And then I'm coming along at my 45, and I'm starting to scrape it off. You see I got something in here, and it left a line. Some piece of debris. Take that out. Wipe it on your pants. Mud is water soluble, so this will wash off. I recommend pre-soaking it in a bucket of water before you put it in your washer, no plug it. The concrete on my pants, or the paint, will not wash off. So I'm just starting, it's very clumpy, something I've gotten some goo in there from the top, so I'm just going to keep working it. So now I'm going in a slightly more oblique angle. Oblique? I think it's oblique. So instead of going at my seat 45, now I'm flattening out. So there was my C45 for embedding. Now I'm flattening it out. That's helping to smooth this mud and to leave a coat on. I'm also pressing hard on this edge and light in the middle because I want to round this seam. I want this seam to disappear when you look at it. Okay, and you'll see there's a bit of a nail, a screw that went in at an angle and was too high, but we couldn't get it at any different angle, is sitting there. I'll just keep working that with every subsequent coat. I'm just going to leave a little bit of extra mud over him. Okay, that was coat 2 for the seam before my camera battery died. And we finished it out. It's lightly feathered on this edge. I can barely feel the edge. This is ready to dry for a day. This is done. I have a little bit of a scratch here. You probably can't see in the light, but if I try and take this scratch out here, I'm going to add one there. If I try to take that scratch out there, I'm going to add one there. At some point, you just have to stop, let it dry. You're going to sand it. There's one more coat. Don't panic. For my screws for the second coat, this is a first coat screw. They're all spot filled. This is a second coat screw. I went ahead and filled them all in a line to feather them out. So this is how I did it. Second coat screws, where the seam has tape and I'm rounding it and I'm embedding more, the screws are very flat. So I want to get most of this mud off. I'm really just trying to fill those dimples and make sure they don't show up. So I'm really taking all the globs off. So this is smooth. Second coat, I'm actually going to connect these two lines just because that'll make everything vanish a little easier in the final. This is ready to wait for a day. This is second coat mud seam, second coat mud screw. All right. Okay, quick thing on corner seams. I'm going to do a mini corner because I'm actually in a different spot in my mudding right now, but I'm going to show you how to do the corner. So something like this perfect 90 is well worth your money and time. It'll just make, you can do this with paper tape. This is basically paper tape with some stiff pieces on it that really makes your corners turn out nice. It's so worth your extra money. So corners are just harder versions of the first seam. We have to embed them first, and then we have to let them dry. They take longer to dry. There's more mud here, and they generally don't breathe as well. So I'm taking my corner. I have lots of mud in there. I'm just gently pressing it in, making sure it's actually in that corner. Then I'm going to take my knife, holding my edge, press firmly, feather that down on one side, press firmly, feather that down on the other, make sure it's embedded, clean up your edges, pull off any excess mud. That's a corner ready to dry. Actually, for me, that's a corner ready to rip out and make sure it's clean because I'm not leaving it there because they'll do the whole corner at once. But that's a corner ready to dry. It'll get a second coat like the second seams. It can get a third coat. They're hard to put on. It depends on how time pressed you are. It should get a third coat for like really pretty drywall. But if you're moving along fast, you probably won't notice a 2-coat corner. Outside corners, let me pause and I'll tilt you to an outside corner. Tilt to an outside corner. Okay, there is an outside corner right here. Outside corners need a metal corner bead. I don't have one here, but when you go to put on your metal corner bead, you're just going to add mud. It's just an angled piece of metal. You squash it on there, and then it does have little nail holes. You will want to use nails for that because it's dimpled. You'll nail it in, and then you'll add your paper tape on either side, just like a flat seam. It'll look just like a flat. You'll treat the edges of your metal corner bead like a seam so that it feathers and disappears. So that's how that works. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my mud and move on. Okay, coat 3. We're coming at a different angle. I'm trying to get you sideways to this. So coat 3 is hopefully our final coat. If not, it's drywall. You can put on 4 or 5, whatever you want to make it disappear. But I've got ridges, I've got little bumps, I've got lines here. So I want to try and make my third coat as easy as possible. So this is where I actually do a fair bit of sanding. Which means I'm going to put on my mask. So when I sand, I'm really trying to sand these edges because that's really what you're going to see is these line transitions between without taking off this paper coating. When I start to stop seeing gray and start seeing the interior of the drywall, when it starts to change colors, I've oversanded. I'm probably done. I'm also trying not to tear up my paper. You'll start to see it gets feathery and the edges, it looks like over wet paper. Or you have sanded your seams too much and it's time to stop and put on coat 3. So here I'm going to do a little bit of sanding. I'm just going to spot sand a section here. Okay. Very dusty. Let the dust settle. Okay. Now, here's my bedding knife. We went to coat 2 knife, and now we're to coat 3 knife. See the size difference? So you can do all this with the embedding knife. You do 3 passes. You try and feather. It's going to be harder for sure. The coat 2 knife, you can definitely do 2 passes with your coat 2 knife, the second widest knife, to save yourself a little money. You buy 3, or you buy the third awesomeness wide knife, which is my 3 main dry mudding tools. Okay, I'm putting this on in a big wide swatch, and this one I'm going to work really hard to feather these edges. And anywhere I come up with lines, I might work on redoing this. Okay. I dragged a little piece of debris, I'll have to get them out. Now my drywall line is now feathered from here to here. It started out there, here to there, and now we're the width of this braid. What that means is when I look sideways, when I'm staring at the wall, my eyes are not going to be drawn to the seam, because it's now feathered off of this whole edge and it's hard to see that crown. And that should take very little time to dry. Can be resanded and then you can go coat 4 or 5 or whatever you need to be happy with your technique. And then after this, I would take my spray texture, and if you're doing a small job, you buy the little can at the hardware store and you spray texture. If you're doing a big job, you buy the little hopper and hook it up to your air compressor and you do a big job, and you can do orange peel, which is the little teeny dots, or you can do the knockdown, where you spray a ton of texture, and then you take something and you knock down the texture. Knockdown hides a lot more than orange peel. Obviously, no texture is the hardest to hide mistakes in, and knockdown is the easiest. So you could pick your texture based on how happy you are with how you finish, and after that, if I was just going with my seams, then I would just either vacuum or blow down these walls and to get all the dust off, and then I'm ready to prime and paint and be done. All right, get to drywalling.